Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ape Nation, your number one source for all things Planet of the Apes on YouTube. My name is Josh, and today I am continuing my series of reviews for every single Planet of the Apes movie, with the second entry in the Caesar trilogy and rebooted series of films that will continue with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes this May, 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. If you like what I do here and want to show your support, be sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. As always, before we get started, let's first take a little bit of a dive into the film's behind-the-scenes history. After the success of Rise of the Planet of the Apes once it was released in August of 2011, a sequel was soon put into development with writers Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, as well as director Rupert Wyatt, all planning to return. When asked about his approach to the sequel, Wyatt stated, "I think we're ending with certain questions, which is quite exciting. To me, I can think of all sorts of sequels to this film, but this is just the beginning. We want to grow and evolve in the films that will hopefully come after this to the '68 original." In November 2011, Andy Serkis was the first to be announced as having closed a deal for a sequel to Rise for him to reprise his role as Caesar. On May 15th, 2012, it was announced that Scott Z. Burns, writer of films like The Bourne Ultimatum, Contagion, and The Informant, had been hired to do rewrites on the original script that was written by Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver. On May 31st, 2012, 20th Century Fox announced that the sequel would be titled Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and it was scheduled for release on May 23rd, 2014. On September 17th of 2012, reports began to circulate online that director Rupert Wyatt was considering leaving the sequel due to feeling like the May 2014 release date would not give him enough time to make the movie the way he wanted to. Wyatt would soon officially leave the project, and on October 1st, Matt Reeves, director of Cloverfield and Let Me In, was confirmed as his replacement. Soon after Reeves was hired, Mark Baumbach, who did uncredited rewrites on Rise of the Planet of the Apes, was hired to do a rewrite of the script. By the end of 2012, both James Franco and Freida Pinto had confirmed that they would not be returning for the sequel. It would later be confirmed by the filmmakers that both of their characters had died off screen due to the simian flu virus that had begun to spread at the end of the first film. Casting commenced from February through March of 2013, with Gary Oldman, Jason Clarke, Kerry Russell, Judy Greer, and Cody Smith McPhee all cast in leading roles. Toby Kebbell later joined the cast to play the role of Koba, the scarred laboratory ape who killed Jacobs at the end of the first film. Just like Rise, visual effects for Dawn were done by Weta Digital. The film's score was composed by Michael Giacchino, who Matt Reeves had collaborated with for Cloverfield and Let Me In. Giacchino made references to Jerry Goldsmith's themes from the 1968 film, as well as Danny Elfman's theme for the 2001 film, while also incorporating some of his own themes, referencing certain elements from the scores for Lost and Super 8. On June 20th, 2013, Fox announced that the release date for Dawn was being pushed back 2 months to July 18th, 2014, which would later be pushed back up 1 week to July 11th. The film was shot from April through July of 2013, with filming primarily taking place in New Orleans and Vancouver. The film premiered at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, California on June 26, 2014, and closed to the 36th Moscow International Film Festival on June 28th. The film was made for a budget of $170 million and was released on July 11, 2014, to both critical and audience acclaim. The film went on to be the most successful Planet of the Apes film to date, making $710.6 million worldwide. Just like Rise, Dawn was also nominated for Best Visual Effects at the 2015 Academy Awards. Moving on to my personal experience with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, at the time that this movie was coming out, it was probably the most excited I had ever been for a movie outside of maybe Star Wars The Force Awakens, which was coming out about a year later. Like, I was so hyped for this movie, and the hype and build up to this movie in general was huge. It was really crazy. I spent almost every day checking for news and updates and trying to get my hands on anything I could, waiting for a trailer to drop, waiting for casting, waiting for new set photos, waiting for anything, because I could not wait to go back into this world that had been started with Rise. And when Rupert Wyatt left, I was very nervous. Immediately, I was like, oh no, we're in trouble here. This franchise is going to be derailed. We got one great movie and it's just going to go south, and that was it. And then Matt Reeves was announced to come on board, and pretty much instantly I was back. I was excited seeing his resume at the time. And I'm not a huge Cloverfield fan. I also didn't love his Let Me In remake, but I thought both of them were very well made, competently directed films that had a maturity and had an intense edge to them that I thought was appropriate for Planet of the Apes and could continue what Rupert Wyatt started with Rise. So I was really excited about the idea of him coming on board. And once we started seeing the first image of Caesar, I think it came out at Comic-Con like the year before the movie came out, and there were people reacting to the trailer that had debuted there. Like, everyone was raving about it. That's when I got really excited. And then we got the first trailer, that teaser trailer that I think is one of the best teaser trailers ever, that just ends with that long pan out of Caesar ready to launch his apes that we see later at the beginning of this movie. I still remember seeing that trailer for the first time, being so excited. And I was even more excited when the second trailer came out, so excited that I actually skipped class so I could watch it. It was coming out at like 11 or 12 o'clock that day, and I had class and I didn't go because I wanted to watch it the second it dropped online. And then the build up to this movie, the lead into the summer that this movie was coming out, I don't know what it was, but this was like the movie that summer. I can't remember anything else really huge that came out that summer. There were other movies that did well and were good, but this was the movie of the summer. This was that middle of July big tentpole that everyone was excited for. And for that one amazing moment, Planet of the Apes was the thing. It was the thing that everyone was talking about. And I still remember to this day just being so excited about that prospect that everyone was so hyped for a Planet of the Apes movie. And then it did so well, and it was so loved by everybody. And so that whole event, the build up to the movie, was amazing. And then I saw the movie on opening night. And this is an interesting thing that I don't share this feeling with a lot of people. I was underwhelmed. I was not in love with the movie the first time I saw it. And looking back, I think it was just because the movie was not what I was expecting. It was so tonally and stylistically different from Rise. It wasn't the same type of movie. It wasn't the same type of storytelling. And I think I'd gone so long rewatching Rise and being so excited for this movie that I maybe had built up in my head what I thought a sequel to Rise would be. And so when I saw this movie, I left feeling mixed. I was like, that was really well done. I liked a lot of things about it, but something was missing. It didn't have something about Rise that I really loved. But over the course of the next several months, I sat with this movie and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I kept going back to certain scenes in my head, and I kept thinking about certain moments. And then finally, a few months later, when it came out on Blu-ray and digital, I watched it again and I loved it. And I immediately realized that it was a better movie, and it was just an overall incredible movie. And I've gone on to rewatch this movie again and again and again over the years. And it's now to a point where this is one of my all-time favorite movies. I don't know if I have like an overall top 50, top 100, top 200, something like that. But if I do, this movie is definitely in there. This is a really incredible, groundbreaking, fantastic, and well-rounded, well-executed on pretty much every level movie. And now I'm going to get into why. A growing nation of genetically evolved apes led by Caesar is threatened by a band of human survivors of the devastating virus unleashed a decade earlier. They reach a fragile peace, but it proves short-lived as both sides are brought to the brink of war that will determine who will emerge as Earth's dominant species. Starting things off with, of course, the characters and the acting. Andy Serkis, who I could not stop raving about in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, returns to play the role of Caesar, and he might be better in this movie than he was in Rise. Andy Serkis is phenomenal here, and it's actually a much more understated performance, I think, than in Rise. I think what we get here with Caesar in general as a character, but Andy Serkis's portrayal of him is a lot more subdued. He's a lot more intense, but it's a lot more restrained, and I think that plays into how far Caesar has come since Rise, since it's 10 years later. He's a much more mature character this time, and I think the strongest scenes for Andy Serkis are in those moments where you see that really reserved anger and intensity intensity. And what I really love about Caesar in this movie is the arc that it takes him on. It takes what Battle for the Planet of the Apes tried to do with that version of Caesar played by Roddy McDowall, and it actually executes it well, and not just well, like 10 times, 20 times better. I love the idea of Caesar going on this journey where he starts in a place of what he thinks is peace, and in his mind he has kind of gotten this idea that apes are the superior being because they don't succumb to all the faults that humans do. They're better and they have risen above because they're not fallible in the way that humans are. They don't make the same kind of mistakes. They don't have the same kind of greedy tendencies, a lot of which led to humanity's downfall. And over the course of this movie, you watch Caesar as he learns through the actions that happen, through what happens with Koba, through what happens with his son, through what happens with the humans and all those interactions. He eventually comes to the conclusion that no, apes are just as fallible as humans. They have the same kind of flaws. If they're not careful, it could lead to the same downfall that the humans are currently going through.
I always think ape better than human. I see now how much like them we are.
I really love the arc that Caesar goes on in this movie. It's really, really fascinating. It's really powerful too, and it humanizes Caesar even more so than it did in the first film. So I really love what Matt Reeves did with Caesar in this movie. It took him from a really fantastic character that we all love to possibly one of the greatest characters of all time, and that will be even more certified in the next movie, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Getting into most of the human cast, we have Jason Clarke, who plays Malcolm. This is where there's a bit of debate among some fans. Some people think that the human characters in this movie are kind of boring. Others, like myself, actually really like the human characters here, and I think Malcolm is the best of the bunch. I really like Jason Clarke as Malcolm. I like Jason Clarke in general. He's a really good actor, and he does a really great job in this role. I think Malcolm is a much better, much more compelling and interesting human protagonist than Will Rodman was in the first one. And while I did really like that bond between Will and Caesar, that was really what sold it for me. The character as a whole, I think, is much better portrayed when it comes to Malcolm. I love his bond with Caesar as well. I love that relationship and that friendship that grows over the course of the movie. It's really well written, and I think the two of them have a really great camaraderie with each other and a great understanding that we get to see unfold over the entire course of the movie. Then we also have Kerry Russell as Ellie, who I think is very likable and very empathetic, and she's an overall enjoyable character, and I think that goes a long way in making the entire human side of the story more engaging. Doesn't get to do a whole lot in the story, but she serves her purpose well. The same can be said for Cody Smith-McPhee, who plays Malcolm's son, Alex. Again, I find him to be very empathetic. I find him to be likable. There's a scene later in the movie that I'll get to that I really like him in, and overall I just find him to be a mostly enjoyable character. Then we have Gary Oldman as Dreyfus, who I don't know if you consider him a villain. He is more of just an antagonist in a way. He doesn't really have a role as a villain in the story. There's another character that I'll get to in a second that serves that purpose a bit more, but I think he does a really, really fantastic job with very little screen time. Really, he only has like maybe 7 or 8 minutes of total screen time in the whole movie. He only shows up a couple times, but every time he shows up, he reminds you why he's one of the best actors in the world. Gary Oldman is just a really incredible actor, and he brought it in this movie. Not like show stealing or anything, but he's really great, and there's a couple moments you get with him that are intense and also really intimate that I enjoy a lot. As for the one weak link in the human cast and really the cast in general, and honestly, this is the only issue I have with the entire movie, Kirk Acevedo as Carver. Now, I think the actor does a really good job. I think he gives a really solid performance. He's convincing in his role. I just find the character incredibly annoying. He's kind of an improved version of Tom Felton's character in Rise, but he serves for the most part the same purpose. He is just there to be an agitator. He doesn't have any real motivations, and the motivations that he is given don't make any sense. For me, it's just he is this guy who just hates apes and doesn't really have any real reason to. There's this scene where he basically blames them for the virus, and there's no real reason given why he blames the apes.
You can't honestly blame the apes.
Who the hell else am I gonna blame? It was a simian flu.
It was a virus created by scientists in a lab. The chimps they were testing on didn't really have a say in the matter.
Spare me the hippy-dippy bullshit. You telling me you don't get sick to your stomach at the sight of them? Huh?
he makes it clear that he knows that the apes didn't do anything wrong. He knows that a virus that was started by humans is what caused this, and yet he still has a problem with the apes. Why? Because the plot needs him to. And it's something that could have very easily been fixed with like a quick line of dialogue, like maybe his brother was in the helicopter during that scene at the end of Rise where Jacobs gets killed. You know, I don't know, but like something, anything to make him have some sort of valid reason to dislike the apes, and it's just not there. To me, he's the weakest part of the entire movie, and really the only flaw I have with the entire movie, because everything else I'm about to say is stuff that I either like or think is fantastic. Speaking of, getting back to the ape cast, Toby Kebbell as Koba. Koba is the main villain in this movie, and honestly, his performance here might be even better than Andy Serkis. For the most part, Toby Kebbell steals this entire movie for me. I think his performance is incredible. He does a really great job at making you feel both empathetic for and terrified of Koba. When you look at different scenes with him, there are moments where you really get where he's coming from, and he portrays that really well. And he's able to make you look at him as this sympathetic, sad, tragic character who just carries this anger and carries this sadness, but he's also able to make you scared of what he's going to do next, because you have no idea what he's going to do next. He's a completely unpredictable wild card, and he's crazy and he's unhinged. It really makes for a fantastic villain. To me, he is one of the best villains we have had in a movie in general in a very long time. I think Koba is so well realized, so well written, so well acted by Toby Kebbell. He's a really phenomenal character in just about every way you can imagine. You also have Nick Thurston as Blue Eyes, and this is someone who I think is very underrated. I think the performance that is given here is really, really great. And honestly, it wasn't until the last couple of times I've watched this movie over the last few years that I've really started to feel this way. I think Nick Thurston's performance as Blue Eyes, Caesar's son, it's really expressive. He brings a lot of emotion just through his eyes, the same way that Andy Serkis was able to do in the first movie. He has a really great arc as well, and I like seeing his relationship with Caesar explored. It's a great father-son dynamic, and him having this kind of angsty, rebellious teenage story where over the course of the movie he matures and he realizes the error of his ways, similar to his father, who also realizes the error of his ways. And I love the way that that's explored between the two of them. I love the way it's handled. I love the way it's executed. It's a really well done character that I don't think gets enough credit. You also have Judy Greer as Cornelia, and this is something that isn't necessarily a problem I have with the movie. It's more just Judy Greer is a really great actress who I always love seeing, and they kind of just waste her completely. I don't really know why she was cast in this role. She doesn't have a single line of dialogue. She doesn't really have anything to do in the movie at all. She only shows up like 3 or 4 times, and she's barely even a character. She just exists to be Caesar's wife, and that's it. It's not so much a complaint, it's just an observation for me. I just wish they'd done more with her, just because Judy Greer is a really talented actress, so I would have liked her to be utilized more, but it's fine because it doesn't hinder the movie at all for me. You also have Terry Notary back as Rocket, as well as Karen Knoble back as Maurice, both of which I love. Maurice especially, I think he's even more lovable than he was in Rise, and him along with Rocket are both really loyal, really strong friends to Caesar, and I love seeing the evolution of that from where they were in Rise as a group. As for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes story, what I love so much about this movie, and it's been said by people a dozen times at this point, but it is a major element of it, and that is that it's much more of a Shakespearean tragedy and this character-driven drama disguised as a blockbuster. It has shades of Hamlet throughout. It has this epic tragedy to it overall, and I really just love the way it's presented, but it also does it while feeling like an epic blockbuster summer movie. You have your big action sequences, you have your sci-fi elements, you have your big set pieces, you have the spectacle of it all. It makes the movie as a whole feel bigger, and it makes it feel more important in a way, and I've always loved that about it. I also think the human characters are a major improvement over Rise. They have really compelling arcs, I think, on both sides of the aisle, and the emotionally complex storytelling is present throughout. You have things going on that are much more mature, much more complicated than the overall story that was going on in Rise, and everything is much more real and grounded in a way, and human, and it's something that elevates this movie above a lot of films of its kind and in the blockbuster space in general. And something else I really love about the story in this film, And it plays into what I was talking about originally when I first saw this movie and wasn't as big a fan of it. It's such an unexpected direction to go in as a sequel to Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but it also feels very fitting, and it feels like it's such a natural progression of where we were in that movie. You know, you look at that movie and it's this sci-fi action thriller, whereas this movie is like a post-apocalyptic epic drama. They're not necessarily polar opposites, but they're very different types of films, yet they complement each other very, very well. And so I really appreciate the unexpectedness of where things go in this movie and how different it feels, but also how fitting it is with the first film. And something that did bother me initially also is that it loses a bit of the heavy focus on Caesar. The first movie is laser focused on Caesar. It is his story from beginning to end. But with this one, you have more characters introduced. You have more going on with characters. You have things going on with Koba. You have things going on with Malcolm. You have things going on with Blue Eyes. So it's a bit more of an ensemble piece with Caesar at the center. But I think it makes up for it with the strong balance of well-written and really interesting characters and complex storytelling going on throughout. And then when it comes to the overall aesthetic and the world building that's going on here, I think this does things better than any Apes movie has done in a very long time, where you see the progression of ape civilization, and it's done really well, and also it's really visually fun and exciting to look at. I love the way that the ape city looks. I love how they've built everything. It's starting to have those shades of the 1968 film. They begin to plant seeds here and there. They're blending remnants of modern post-apocalyptic tones with early stages of that primitive ape society. The ape language is also still evolving, so it's heavy on the sign language. In fact, even the first 10 minutes as a whole has no dialogue whatsoever, and the speaking from all the apes is kept to a minimum, and it's broken up. It's this broken, primitive version of English, and I think it was a very smart choice that they went that way. They didn't just dive right into having apes starting to speak and having apes being super smart. They're still learning. They're still figuring out how to navigate being intelligent apes and learning how to speak, how to function as a society, and I think it works really, really well in the movie and in the trilogy as a whole. It's a great stepping stone and a very fitting next step forward from where we left off in Rise. It's also the best looking movie up to this point in the entire franchise. The cinematography here is stunning. It's a really visually impressive movie, and also it's very impactful with its cinematography. The camera is actually really well utilized as a true storytelling device when it comes to how Matt Reeves visually expresses what he's trying to convey on the screen and the story that he's trying to tell. And then speaking of Matt Reeves, his direction here is really, really incredible and such a step up from what we got in the first movie. It's epic and it's mature, and the tone is massive and grand, and it feels so much bigger than the first movie, and it feels like such a bigger scale blockbuster as a whole. I think that post-apocalyptic tone is executed really well, and it's built out overall really well. The character relationships like Caesar and Blue Eyes, or Caesar and Koba, and then also Caesar and Malcolm, but then also things like Malcolm and his family, or Malcolm and Dreyfus. I think you have really great character dynamics throughout this entire movie that are all really well developed and really well explored and well utilized overall. And then the pacing here is so impressive. The way that it takes its time engaging you in the world, letting you get invested in every character as it eases you into the story along the way. For example, like the opening scene, which is one of my favorite opening scenes to a movie ever, where we get introduced to the virus and we get to see how it's spread all over the world, which is kind of an elongated version of what we got in the end credits of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I think it's just so haunting, and it's effective, and it's a perfect way to set the stage for the rest of the movie and get you ready to go on this journey. There's also so many beautiful and impactful small character moments that strengthen the overall weight of the movie. There's one that I really love that I mentioned earlier. It's a scene with Cody Smith McPhee's character where he's approached by Maurice, and the two of them have this nice little bonding moment over a book.
We were hanging out at this kegger down at the swimming hole. Hanging out.
I really have always loved that scene. It's one of my favorites in the movie. There's also another great moment with Caesar where he's reminiscing on his youth when he was back with Will and he's watching that video.
Home. 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 Yes. This is your home. Your home.
It's so well done. And there are other scenes like that, just like the scene with Caesar and Blue Eyes on the couch, or the scene where they get the electricity working and they get the music turned on. These are all small moments, but they're so memorable, and they all achieve kind of the same thing at just building out the overall emotional complexity of the movie and the weight of the movie and the storytelling as a whole and the characters as a whole, and it really just adds the experience of the whole thing. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a bigger movie. It's a much more heavy on the action side of things. It's more of a blockbuster in a sense, and the action sequences are very intense and they're so well done. They're really exciting to watch, specifically that big battle scene between the apes and the humans that happens about midway through the movie, which has one of the best shots in any Planet of the Apes movie ever. And the action as a whole, it's handled with a much more somber and artful style than Rise, whereas the third act in Rise was much more of a straightforward action scene, and I love that entire fight on the Golden Gate Bridge. But with this movie, the action is handled a bit more artfully, and I really appreciate that, and it adds to the overall maturity of the whole thing. But it's also a bit of a have your cake and eat it too situation, because while a lot of the stuff that we see is handled with a much more maturity and much more artistically, and overall has a bit more of a bleak tone to it, it all ultimately leads to the final fight between Caesar and Koba, and it's just a really fun, awesome fight scene. Not so much as artistically done, not so much as somber in tone, but it's really entertaining, and it's also really well earned because it's these two characters that you watch go on this journey throughout the movie finally coming to a head, and on an emotional level and on a storytelling level, it works incredibly well. And then, of course, we gotta talk about the visual effects in this movie, because while I think Rise of the Planet of the Apes looked incredible, the visual effects at the time were stunning and they were groundbreaking. This movie takes things to an entire other level. The CGI here is some of the best that has ever been put on screen, and it tops the first in every single way. This is so flawlessly photoreal. There are few, if any, shots that are hard to buy into. Nothing feels fake. It all looks so hyper real, and there's also that hyper real movement of the apes that helps sell the realism as a whole. The visual effects in these movies, but specifically this one and the next one, it's some of the best that I have ever seen put into any movie as far as just CGI characters go. It's really incredible what the people at Weta were able to do, paired with the great performances from people like Andy Serkis and Toby Kebbell. And without it, you would not be able to make these movies, and they would not work as well as they do. This movie holds up better than even certain movies coming out today, which is insane to think about. But when it comes to the CGI in this movie, it's some of the best that I've ever seen. Moving on to the music in this movie, that was not done by Patrick Doyle, who scored the first film, but instead was done by Michael Giacchino. Now, Michael Giacchino is a big name in the musical score industry, arguably the biggest composer working today outside of maybe Hans Zimmer and Ludwig Göransson, but even then I think he might be a little bit above Ludwig when it comes to just overall popularity and iconography. But Giacchino's music in this is, I think, some of the best of his entire career. What I really love about it is that it complements and emphasizes the epic nature of the storytelling and tone that we have going on here. There's also so many small but really well done nods and homages to Jerry Goldsmith's 1968 music. It's heavy on nature inspired sound, I think, a lot of the time. I will say it does lack a bit of the heart and some of the themes that I loved from Rise, but I love the new themes that are introduced. And I also think that some of that would feel a little out of place in the story that we're telling in this movie and should have just stayed in that movie. So I am okay with moving on to a different sound when it comes to the music. And I think Michael Giacchino did a fantastic job in that regard. And then one other thing that I really love about this movie a lot are the themes that it's touching on. And something that the Caesar trilogy has been criticized of, at least from what I've seen here and there, is that they don't delve as much into the political and social commentary that the original movies did. And I don't agree with that at all. I think it's just a bit more subtle, and I think it's just not as prominent, but it's still there, and it's still a very important part of the story and a part of the script. And in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, something that is very much talked about, that I think is very much a major theme, is the idea that is actually something that came from Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which is violence only prolongs violence. And that is present throughout this entire movie. It's not really directly stated, but when you just look at what the film is telling you, when you look at the acts that are taken by Koba, that are taken by the humans throughout the story, it's a story about violence violence, and that nothing really good can come from it, and that acts of violence, especially when done in revenge or done in trying to enact some sort of justice, it usually is not the answer, and it is usually just going to result in more violence and more death and more people getting hurt. And that is exactly what happens in this movie, and I think it's really well explored. And something else that I think is really well explored to, I think, a much more directly stated degree, is the consequences of political extremism. Now, obviously, this is something that could be heavily related to things that have gone on in today's world and in today's political climate. And what I love about the movie is that the way that it expresses these ideas and these views. When you look at a character like Koba specifically, who is someone who lets his ideologies and he lets his anger and he lets his hatred and he lets what are very justified viewpoints to a certain extent get the better of him and lead to that violence and lead to that extremism that ultimately leads to a war by the end of the movie that we get to in the next film. And it leads to fighting and it leads to death and it just leads to apes getting killed and it leads to more humans getting killed, and it doesn't do any good for anybody and it doesn't move the world forward for either side in a positive way.
Humans! You ape prisoner now! You will know life in cage! More humans out there! Go find them!
I think it's something that's really interesting that very few blockbusters have the balls to say in a way like this. And so I'm really happy that this movie exists for this reason, among many other reasons, but I'm really glad that there is a film out there in the modern blockbuster world that's looking at topics like this and it's expressing them while still overall telling a great story with compelling characters and making the entire thing entertaining. So overall, I think that Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is up there with some of the best sequels of all time, whether you're talking about things like Terminator 2, The Godfather Part 2, The Empire Strikes Back, The Two Towers. It's up there for me as one of the all-time great film sequels. It improves on its predecessor in pretty much every single way. It is a masterful piece of blockbuster filmmaking and storytelling in general. Matt Reeves came on board and then knocked it out of the park. There are things that I personally love a bit more when it comes to Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but this one just executes all the different goals that it has in a much better way. It's such a thought-provoking movie. The storytelling is engaging, the action is fantastic, the character work is great, it's visually stunning. I also think it's a love letter to everything Planet of the Apes has always stood for, but just through a modern lens. It's so moving, it's so impactful, and it's one of my favorite movies of the last 10 to 20 years. I could continue talking about how much I love this movie. There are so many scenes, so many moments, so many elements that I love. And while I still need to rewatch War for the Planet of the Apes, this might be my favorite of the three. It's such an incredible movie. It's such a stunning achievement when it comes to just blockbuster movies and just movies in general. It is one of the best movies in the entire Planet of the Apes franchise. Some argue it's the best, even better than the original. I don't think I'm one of those people, but I totally understand those who are. I love this movie and it's one of my all-time favorites. Those are my thoughts on Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Let me know what you think of the movie down below. Do you agree with my points? Do you disagree with any of my points? If you haven't seen the film yet, did this review do anything to make you want to check out the movie? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will be back very soon with my review for the final film in the Caesar trilogy, War for the Planet of the Apes. Thank you so much for checking out today's video here on Ape Nation. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. I'll catch you in the next one, so until then, goodbye.